Okay. All right, who's ready to work out? Blah. I'm just kidding. It's not that painful. It's just a learning process. That's all it is. If you're slightly uncomfortable though, then you're doing it right, right? Remember, we're not trying to become bodybuilders. We just want to cross the finish line. Okay. Okay. So here we are. Now, same question we just looked at before, right? Although I guess it didn't say the answer. Okay. So here's a little breakdown I want you to think about. When you look at these questions, the first thing you want to identify is what outcome are they looking for? So sometimes I'll read the question and then like read the thing and it says, which of the following will occur when the EC2 instance is stopped and started? So the first thing you know that they're looking for is they want to know what's going to change or not change if the EC2 instance is going to stop and started. Then go back to the question. First of all, what service are we talking about? EC2, right? Now, we're not just talking about EC2 though, we're talking also about how instant storage works with EC2 and how elastic IP addresses work with EC2. They want to know if you know what will change if you either start, stop, or terminate an instance. What happens to instant storage? What happens to the elastic IP address? Okay. The rest of that, by the way, is just all preamble, right? So then the first thing you need to know is that if you terminate an instance, right, it's going to disassociate the elastic IP address. And of course, obviously, the elastic data storage is going to go away. By the way, if you don't use instant storage, what's the other service you're going to use? The actual service you're going to use if you don't use instant storage. I'm going to go ahead and answer this, right? Just, oh, wait, sorry, I clicked the whole wrong thing. Anyway, it didn't matter. That's not what I wanted. All right, so see this, by the way? The way instant storage work is instant storage is actually storage that's actually on the host, not the virtual machine, right? Because none of it's really on the virtual machine. But the storage is here. These are SSDs that are actually on the physical underlying host computer, which is down here. There's a bunch of virtual machines on there. If this EC2 instance is stopped and migrated to another host, guess what you lose? You lose access to these disks, which means your data is gone because you've moved the virtual machine over to another host. It's actually gone from this host to this host. So there's no way Amazon's going to let you. As a matter of fact, Amazon can't even recover the data, even if they found the old host that you're on, because another virtual machine probably got started and ate your disks, right? So, because that's what happens all the time. So just know they're asking you, one, do you know how instant storage works? By the way, what's the other service you're going to use if you don't use instant storage? And it is the recommended service for providing a hard drive to EC2. What's the name of that service?
EBS.
EBS, right? Elastic Block Storage. That is the hard drive service for EC2. So most of the time, you're not going to use instant storage. I don't even know why they test you on this, because the recommendation is not to use instant storage unless you're just using scratch drives or ephemeral systems. Okay. All right. So the other thing to note is that they're going to want you to know about the service. They're going to want you to know what outcome they're looking for, and they want you to know how these services relate to each other. Remember that a solutions architect's job is to know the services and how the services interoperate. You're not an enterprise architect. You're not a software architect, right? You're not a systems architect. You are a solutions architect. Your job is to figure out how services work independently and how the services interoperate. That's literally the definition of a solutions architect, right? Is that integration points is what they do. So let's go break down another one. So company has clients across the globe, and they're using S3 buckets, which are behind their own CloudFront distribution. So we got two services we know are in play, S3 and CloudFront. They want to deliver their content to a specific client, and they want to make sure the client can access the data, only the client. only the client. So now we get these two services. They want to deliver content to a specific client, and they want to make sure that security-wise, only that client can access it. So currently, all of their clients can access buckets using S3 URL or the CloudFront distribution. So we now know the security parameters. They got one client. They want exclusive controlled access. But right now, all of their clients can actually go through S3 or through CloudFront. So they want to serve the private content via CloudFront only to secure the distributions of files. So we got a bunch of requirements here. We're talking mainly about CloudFront and S3. And so which combination of actions should the architect implement to meet the above requirements? What are the requirements? They want to deliver content to a specific client. They want to make sure that only that client can access that content, right? And they want to make sure that they serve the private content via CloudFront only. So they want to secure their distribution of their files. So then instantly, by the way, without even looking at the answers, somewhere in here, there should be an origin access identity or an OAI that is used by CloudFront in order to secure access against S3. So I haven't even looked at the answers yet, but somewhere in here should be OAI. So I know automatically like the answer should include that in some form or fashion, because that's the way you lock down distribution of S3 content to CloudFront only. Now, which combinations of actions should we implement to meet the above requirements? Okay, so first of all, cloud map to ensure that only clients can access their files. Got to know that I don't think that's what cloud map does, right? Use pre-signed URLs. That sounds good. Pre-signed URLs are a way to like control permissions against, right? CloudFront and S3. App mesh to ensure that only their clients access files. I'm pretty sure that's not what app mesh does, right? App mesh is like a service mesh, right? It's a way of integrating applications together, right? And then restrict access to files in the origin by creating an OAI. I did just mention that an OAI is probably going to be in the answer. And then require the users to access the private content by using special CloudFront signed URLs or signed cookies. Huh. So then here's the question. Are pre-signed URLs part of CloudFront or are pre-signed URLs part of S3, right? So you got to know the services. So first things first, I know that OAI is part of the answer because I know that we use that to restrict and control access. Now, the other question is that are pre-signed URLs part of S3 or are they part of CloudFront? Because that's what they just did with the other answers. Because we know it's not Cloud Map and App Mesh because they're not even used for that. So notice that we excluded 2 answers. I've got 3 left. One of them I'm certain about. Now I'm down to 2 answers. By the way, there's no penalty for guessing. They're not going to penalize you for wrong answers, right? Now, I'm pretty certain, just speculating, right? Require the user. I'm pretty sure that CloudFront signed URLs or signed cookies are actually part of CloudFront, not part of S3, right? But, you know, I've been wrong before, so let's check it out and see if I've, you know, maybe made the wrong decisions here. And it didn't, right? But my point in showing you all that is that you had to know, 1, about the services, and 2, you had to know about the integration of the services, right? So let's go take a look at the details here. All right, so here were the requirements, right? All objects in button are default, right? Pre-signed URLs are used if you want your customers to upload a specific object to your bucket, but you don't want to require them to have credentials, right? Now, notice that requiring you use this by using CloudFront URLs, not S3 URLs. Isn't that interesting? Because remember, one of the requirements was actually to serve content via CloudFront only. So even if there are S3 pre-signed URLs, it didn't actually match requirements. We actually needed to serve everything through CloudFront. And then you can also generate pre-URLs using the SDK.net, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here are the correct answers. App Mesh is just a service mesh that provides application level networking. Cloud Map is simply a cloud resource discovery services that allows you to name your applications with custom names. That's it. So even though S3 pre-signed URLs are a valid solution, it doesn't satisfy the requirement to serve everything through CloudFront. Okay. Let's do another one. A company is storing its financial reports and regulatory documents in an S3 bucket. To comply with audit, they task their SA to track all new objects added to the bucket, as well as any removed ones. It should also track whether a versioned object is permanently deleted. And so the architect must configure S3 to publish notifications for these events to a queue for post-processing and to an SNS topic that will notify the operations team. Which of the following is the most suitable that the architect should implement? Okay. Now, first of all, the requirements that we have is that we've got S3 and we want to track any like removal or additions plus any permanent removals like version removals. And we want to send a notification and we want to send it to a queue. So if we look at the answers, things start getting tricky because we basically have two sets of answers. We have this set of answers, which basically says, let's create a queue and create an SNS topic in a queue. And then we have this one that says SNS topic in an MQ. So we've got two sets of answers there, looking identical. Then let's take a look at the second part. Add a notification to the bucket to publish object created and object removed, delete marker created. Event types to SQS and SNS. Then we have an event notification to publish added and object removed event types to SQS and SNS. And then we have basically object removed delete, so a specific marker, and then object created just like, right, in general, event types. And then we have the same thing with object created, object removed, delete marker created. So what we're seeing here is that we're seeing a variety of different additions because they're switching up created, created, added, created, and then they're switching up object remove delete marker, object remove star, object remove delete, object remove delete marker. Okay, so here's the first thing to know. In general, Amazon's going to favor their higher magnitude services, their higher managed services over their lower managed services. So if you have a choice between EC2 and Lambda, they're going to ask you to choose Lambda. If you have a choice between EC2 and like containers, they kind of prefer you to use containers, right? If you have a choice between DynamoDB and rolling your own SQL database in EC2, they're going to want you to use DynamoDB. So if I were just to speculate, the first thing to think about is that it's probably going to be either create an SNS topic, Amazon MQ, or this other one that says create an SNS topic and an SQS topic. The reason is that Amazon MQ is kind of a platform as a service and a little bit less of a SaaS, which is what SQS is. So you got to know that about the services if you want to like get that kind of question. Now, then what happens is that we now need to compare these two answers, 1 and 3. Now, here's the thing that's funky. This delete marker, by the way, is not a permanent deletion. A delete marker just says that I am pretending the file is deleted with versioning. So now I'm kind of like sitting here thinking to myself, well, maybe it's object remove delete. But let me just throw this out there. I don't remember actually the API calls like off the top of my head super clearly for S3. So I'm sitting here thinking it's probably one of these two options. But what if I'm wrong about this and it actually says, you know what, we need object created and object removed? Like, well, you know what, that says delete marker created. And I'm pretty sure that I added is wrong. And so even if I'm wrong about the SQS MQ thing, I think actually this is the right API because I'm pretty sure that it's created and not added. And I'm pretty sure it's object remove delete and not delete marker. So, but maybe I'm wrong about that. So let's test it out. So let's just do a check and see if my logic is correct, right? Did you follow me there? And I'm telling you, I know that was complex, but I went for higher order services first. So I chose SQS over MQ. And then even though I didn't know, like off the top of my head, I couldn't remember the API call, I definitely remembered that delete markers are not permanent deletion solutions. This just temporarily marks the file as deleted. It doesn't permanently delete the file in versioning. So this is the kind of thing you have to like know about in order to pass. So let's go back.
I would have gotten that one wrong because like I was thinking from what I read that like I would associate versioning with a delete marker and then would have automatically assumed it would have been the first one versus the third. But I guess the context that you're stating about being permanently is why.
Right. If it didn't say permanently deleted, then you probably would have been okay to use delete marker, right? But a delete marker just is another version of the file, right? It's not a permanent deletion of like the file. But any kind of like remove delete layer is you removing an object, whether that object is versioned or not. So the S3 object removed : delete is deletion of anything, whether it's version or non-versioned. So, but this is why we take the practice exams, right? Because they teach us these distinctions quickly, and they teach us the distinctions to pass the exam. So this is why we do this. And so, but you want to be that methodical. If you are not reasoning through this, like in that way, then you're just guessing, right? And don't get me wrong, I love intuition. I think it's a great aspect of intelligence and assessment, right? But for these things, they're gonna, unless you're just a really good psychic, and then I would ask why you're in this industry, you should probably stick with some kind of deductive reasoning to kind of figure this out, right?
So can I ask you a question real quick about this versioning? So my understanding was that you have versioning on and you delete something, then it creates a delete marker, but the actual version of it isn't deleted, right? So
Yeah.
to permanently delete, like they're saying, you have to delete all your versions and then delete the root object.
Exactly.
Which is what would be happening for the third one, I guess. Like the third option is deleting all the versions and deleting the object.
Yeah. So just so you know, the first version, once you turn on, is just a version, right? So if you have 10 versions of a file plus the delete marker because you deleted it to make it look like it wasn't there, you have to delete the delete marker and all 10 versions in order for the object to be gone.
Okay.
So if you had a video file, you changed it 10 times and then you deleted it, the video file is still there in a versioned bucket, and you have to delete the delete marker and all 10 versions of your changes explicitly for that object to go away. Yeah. Oh, JP. So the preferred order of services is anything that SaaS is preferred over a PaaS, over infrastructure as a service. If you're talking about application hosting, that means they're going to prefer Lambda over ECS and EKS over EC2. ECS and EKS, by the way, is the Elastic Kubernetes service and the Elastic Container Service. They are built to host containers. So they're going to prefer that. So like, for example, they're going to prefer DynamoDB usually over RDS over EC2, right? They're going to prefer Elastic Beanstalk over EC2 because Elastic Beanstalk is a wizard for EC2, right? So yeah, so just be aware that there's like these ordered hierarchies of the services. Anything that increases operational offloading, Amazon is typically going to ask you to go after that first if you have a clear choice between two of them. And if we look at the answers just quickly, right? Notice this S3 bucket is actually kicking out to a bunch of things simultaneously, right? So, and notice the event types that they're listed here. So notice it's object created, and there's a put, post, copy, multi-part upload. There's removed, which includes the delete marker and just whatever. And then there's restores, right? If you want to restore an object, and then there's, ignore that. Reduced redundancy is not really used anymore. Replication, right? There's other operations here as well. So notice that it says that for this answer, there is no object added type, event type in Amazon, right? Notice here, notice that this is only used when a delete marker is created and not when an object is deleted or permanently deleted. So exactly what we said, same thing with the next answer, right? By the way, for those of you who just joined us, Gayatri and Amy, just know that we finished an hour-long video ahead of time, just going through logistics around registering for a class and what the certification exam, the context is, and the exam guide. I will share that video with all of you. I'll send you an email. It's about an hour long. And then we talked about how to register for Tutorials Dojo, which just requires you to submit your Booz Allen email address on the Tutorials Dojo portal. So you just sign up for an account. You do have to use last name _ first name at bah.com. If you don't do that, then you won't get access to the practice exams. And then what we're doing is we're going through the practice exams right now, because that's pretty much, because Ryan was telling me that some of you have a deadline of getting this done by the 15th. That's pretty much all you're going to do, is you're going to do one review mode set of your choice, and you're going to do that same set until you get a 90 percentile. And you're going to do the next set until you get a 90 percentile, and then you're going to take the exam. So you can see the video if you need to rehash on that. Okay. But if you have any questions at any point in time, please just throw them in there. Okay. One other question to check. Did either, I'm assuming Gayatri and Amy, you both took the class. Your names look familiar, so maybe you took it with me. The architecting on AWS class, you've already taken it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And then I'm assuming neither one of you have like cloud practitioner, and have you run a production workload in AWS?
I have the cloud practitioner. I think that's, I took that class with you. But I work with people that set up production and dev environments, but I don't do it myself.
No worries. Still won't, it's great for you to take architecting. Okay.
Yeah.
And Gayatri, do you have cloud practitioner already, and have you done a production deployment?
No, I'm new to AWS.
Perfect. Well, then this is still a great certification. I just wanted to check, see where people's levels at. Most people don't have cloud practitioner and haven't done a production workload. So you're still in absolutely the right space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. All right, so let's do the next one. Okay. So I'm gonna break this one down, but this is probably gonna be like the last one where I really break it down. I'm gonna let you all answer after this one. You're gonna answer first, and then we're gonna go through some breakdowns, right? So, all right. So a company hosted a web application on Linux, Amazon EC2 instances in the public subnet that uses the default network ACL. So that's the network access control list. The instance uses a default security group and has an attached elastic IP address. The network ACL has been configured to block all traffic to the instance. The solutions architect must now allow incoming traffic on port 443 to access the application from any source. What combination of steps will achieve this requirement? So in your head, this is an interesting line of thought. So let's say that on the left is the internet, right? So internet's over here, right, with this little box, and over on the other side, let's say with this little rectangle, there's our box, right? So we got the internet in the circle, we got our little box here. What's interesting here is that they have a subnet around the entire thing, and it says using the default network access control list. Now the default ACL, as you remember, is a firewall. So the access control list is a firewall that sits around the entire subnet around the instance. In addition, they have a default security group, and they've attached an elastic IP address to this. So this is kind of like interesting. So they have an elastic IP attached to the system. And in addition, there's a firewall, there's another little firewall here called a security group that's wrapped around the instance. By default, an access control list doesn't block any traffic, but the security group blocks all inbound traffic and allows outbound traffic. So what they've done is that the network access control list has now been configured basically to block all traffic, which I gotta say is a little weird. So this firewall here is actually set to block all traffic, and this firewall here is going to block all inbound traffic, but it's not going to block all outbound traffic. So we've got two firewalls that are basically set to block traffic. That's basically what they told us here. Am I missing something? So now what they're asking us is they're asking us, okay, how can we actually get traffic to flow through this firewall here and through this firewall here on port 443? That's what they're asking us. Okay, let's get rid of these drawings. Okay, so they're asking us to make it so the network access control list will allow inbound traffic on 443, and they're asking us to make it so the security group will allow inbound traffic, right? On 443. Okay. So then in our answer, what we're looking for is I need to change the network ACL, and I'm going to change the security group to allow this to happen. And since it's incoming traffic from any source, which is exactly what the requirements say right here, right? Ignoring my craziness. From any source, then this means that I now need to make sure that I allow anybody to get into 443. Now, if we look at this, this could actually be pretty straightforward. Security group, add a new rule to allow TCP connections from any source. Create a new rule. Oh, that's an interesting distinction. Create a new rule, add a new rule. That's it? That's the difference? Oh, but wait, hold on, they're tricking you. To destination from source. Oh, so tricksy. Did you see that? They made it look like it was almost the same thing, but it's really not. So anyway, we care about where it's coming from. We don't care about where it's going. You know why? Because we know where it's going, right? So add a new rule to allow TCP on port 443 from any source. That's what that 0.0.0/0 is. That means anybody can send me traffic. Okay. So that's the first one. Now, what about the network ACL? So in the network ACL, since this is a stateless firewall, we need 2 rules for bidirectional traffic. If you don't know that a stateless firewall requires 2 rules for bidirectional traffic, you're going to think you're going to do this with 1 rule and you're going to fail, right? You can't. Security groups can do 1 rule, but NACLs require 2 rules to function. So if Errol and I are talking, even though Errol may have given me permission to talk to him, right? If he hasn't given himself permission to talk to me in a stateless situation, then we can't have a conversation. It just means I can like talk to Errol and he's not going to talk back to me, right? So just know with network ACLs, we got to update the rule to allow inbound and outbound traffic on this from the source and to this destination. Now that's a lot. From source and to destination. Actually, you know what? Actually, that works. So because I want to be able to talk to anybody, I want to be able to receive it to anybody. Now, the rest of these, as far as network ACLs, this is restrictive. Although, you know, that port number might work because are we going to talk on outbound on 443? I think it's going to change the outbound port to a different port range. But let's just like check it because maybe I'm missing something here, right? And here it is. Oh, it was what I thought it was. It wasn't actually. There's something wrong with this with the port limitation. So what happens here is that you're going to get an incoming connection on port 443, but not everybody can stay connected to 443. So when it goes outbound to talk to the client, it's going to like respond to it on a higher order port that the client's going to agree to. So it is actually going to shift ports up to a higher number. And why is it 32,000 to 65,000? That's just a higher magnitude port that client connections are usually shifted to, right? So let's break this down. So when a client connects to a server, a random port from the ephemeral port range, which can be above 1024 up to 65, becomes the client's source port. Now, notice they said 1024. That was kind of like throwing me a little bit because they put 32,000 up here, but that'll work. The designated ephemeral port becomes the report for return traffic. So outbound traffic is now going to talk through that port, right? So that was the big shift that we had to make. Now, notice here's the network ACL with the outbound rules and inbound rules. So notice here that we've got custom TCP traffic. So we've got basic an allow from 443, and then another outbound allow from 32,000, et cetera. Interesting, they have the rules in 2 places. Okay. So notice here, by the way, the client that initiates the request chooses the ephemeral port range. So notice, like, I don't know that you have to memorize all of this, but typically it's going to be between, 32,000 and 65,000 is going to be your range, right? So we're so close. The only thing that I forgot there was that it's going to change the outbound port number to a random client port number, and it's not going to keep it on 443. Right? By the way, if you're feeling uncomfortable and daunted by this, good. You should be. Because
Yeah, I
unless
was
you've been,
gonna say that's a hard one.
that's a hard one.
Yeah, I would have went with the first option.
So just know, right, that if you're daunted by this, you just are now getting started on studying, so it should be uncomfortable. And that was a hard one, right, to Errol's point. Remember, you don't have to get them all right. You just have to get 80%. Okay. We'll do one more analysis and then I'll release it. So an investment bank is working with an IT team to handle the launch of a digital wallet system. They're going to run on multiple EBS-backed EC2 instances, so no instant storage. These are permanent drives, right? We're going to store logs, transactions, and billing statements in an S3 bucket. Due to tight security and compliance, the IT team is exploring options on how to safely store sensitive data on the EBS volumes in S3. So which of the following options should be carried out when storing sensitive data on AWS? First of all, just a general question for all of you. What do we do to hard drives or to any kind of data storage device when we want to protect sensitive data?
Encryption.
That's right. Gayatri, good. Encryption. So the question here then is that if that's what we're concerned about with data at rest, then all we need to do is look at the answers for an encryption options for S3 and ABS, right? So based on what I just said, what do we think the answer is going to be? And I usually use like A, B, C, D, and E, by the way, for the numbers designations. Sorry, for the letter designations.
I think so it'd be 2, right? Enable S3 server side client side.
Yeah.
E.
So E, I'm hearing that. And then I see B and E in the answers. Good. And servant side or client side encryption, both of those work. And it actually, S3 has like 4 encryption options, including one that's just pre-put, right? So let's check it out. There we go. So obviously these are the 2 encryption options. Backing things up isn't going to encrypt the data, although it's useful, right? Using Shield and WAF is good for protecting data at transit, not data at rest, which is what disk drives are. And then migrating EC2 instances from a public to a private subnet. I mean, that can help protect the instances a little deeper, but this isn't about the instances. It's about the storing sensitive data, right? Good. Okay. All right. So you take the next one. All right. So I'll read the question and then we're going to do the answers. Company plans to build a web architecture using on-demand EC2 instances and a database in AWS. However, due to money, the company instructed the SA to choose a database service in which they no longer need to worry about database management, tasks such as hardware, software provisioning, setup configuration, scaling, and backups. Which of the following services should the SA recommend? How do you get away from hardware, software provisioning, away from setup, away from config, away from scaling, and away from backup? Which of these services is going to do that for you?
DynamoDB.
Good. Yep. See, a bunch of you posted C, you posted DynamoDB out there. Gayatri, you're absolutely right. So just to say this, RDS uses EC2 instances. Scaling that is difficult, right? Redshift uses nodes. Scaling that is difficult. Elasticache uses nodes. Scaling that is difficult. In terms of comparing it to DynamoDB, which is serverless, which means hidden servers, right? So if we check this out, should be DynamoDB, right? So this is the only fully managed service. The rest of these are kind of like platform as a service. They're a little bit more hands-on.
Now,
Good.
for this question, can we apply that same, I guess, rule of DynamoDB being like the highest one, or closer to Amazon's proprietary versus
Yeah.
on the line?
Yeah, if they don't have any other restrictions, like we need an SQL server, right? Which then would negate DynamoDB, right? Then if they don't have any other requirements and they're just like, hey, I just want you to pick the one that's the most fully managed, it definitely applies because DynamoDB is the only one that's a SaaS versus being a PaaS or a IaaS, right? Okay. We got a manufacturing company. It's got EC2 instances running in AWS. The EC2 instances are configured with auto scaling. There's a lot of requests because there's too much load on the servers. And auto scaling is launching new instances to take the load, but yet some requests are still being launched. Okay. Yeah. This one's a little bit harder to deconstruct because they're saying, what's the most suitable solution that you should implement to avoid losing recently submitted requests? So they're asking you, what change would you make to the architecture to make it so that you're not going to lose all these orders / requests / messages that are coming through? In other words, right? So say again, Gayatri.
Is it SQS? Because we are considering about order and messages, correct?
That's exactly right. So SQS, by the way, is a great landing zone for anything that has orders, requests, or messages. And remember, that fits with the SA principle of loose coupling. How do we make it so that we can actually receive all of the orders and requests in a way that doesn't overwhelm the servers that have to process them? We do that with load balancers all the time, but we don't necessarily think of messaging buses and queues as an abstraction layer that can also do that for us. Because I can dump 1 million messages in SQS, right? And I'm not saying they're going to get processed fast unless I increase the number of processors on the back end, but I'm not going to lose those orders. And that's the main problem they're seeing. Plus, most people don't know this, but SQS can directly trigger an auto scaling group to grow. Most people aren't aware of that. They think load balancers are the only thing that can actually trigger an auto scaling group to grow up and grow EC2 instances up and down. And that's not true. SQS can as well. So from an architectural standpoint, that seems like that's actually the best one. And notice it says approximate number of messages. So that sounds like that's pretty good, actually. This, by the way, that's not. The cluster placement group, you may remember if you took the class, is actually, you'll lose like high availability. And they didn't say anything about Aurora, right? So that doesn't seem to fit either. So also by elimination. And EFA is used for high performance computing connections. So even by elimination, it is most likely B, right? Questions? All right, I hope this is useful because this is what we're going to be doing for the next 2 hours. We're going to take a break. We're going to take a break around 11, just so you know. But this is what we're going to be doing. We're just going to be training and analyzing and deconstructing. So please, if I follow some logic or share something that makes no sense to you, or you're like, hey, Michael, how did you come to this conclusion? Please say something, because this is the meat and potatoes here. Is how do we methodically know what the answer is based on what we know about the services and how they integrate? Okay. Did I mention this is all recorded? Oh, I had a question for all of you. It's a sidebar. If we provided you a recording of someone reading the question and then giving you the answers and then like talking about what the answer breakdown, would that be useful to people? Like if we had, and sorry, it was a video, not an audio recording, like a video of someone running through questions and breaking down the logic about how, like we're doing now. Is that useful? Because Booz was asking us to ask y'all, if we gave you a breakdown of every single question and why this is the right answer and everything, like verbally, like someone walking through it, would that be useful? Okay, cool. All right. Because in that way, you could also just do it on your own leisure. I mean, I know you love hanging out with me because I'm tons of fun, but you know, then you could have access to your own video library and then do your own thing, right? And you might put up with my snarky comments. Okay. And now I have it on video. Haha. Okay, so this one I'm just to let you just read it. Give me your answer either verbally or stick it in the JP, I'm gonna answer that in a question in a second. Yeah, so just put your answer either verbally or place it in the chat. Okay,
It says durable, so I think S3.
good. Good guy, yeah, 3. Good. All right, so here's the key word. Here's the trigger word. If you ever see anything in the question about looking for a service to host static content, even without looking at the answers, the minute you see that in the question, you should think S3, because that is literally one of the use cases Amazon constantly has proffered, is that instead of getting your compute resources, your web servers to host static assets like JavaScript files, like client-side JavaScript, images and videos, just shove that off to S3, and then you can run smaller web servers because they're not feeding out static content. So the minute you see the word static content, instantly think to yourself, oh, Michael said S3. So somewhere in there, S3 is probably going to be in the answer, right? And you know, it helps that they qualified it with durable storage service, to Gayathrie's point. And then they started listing off the static content, PDFs, Word documents, images, right? That kind of thing. And just to say this, so obviously S3 stands out. Now, it also says a file sharing web application, but really honestly, it's the static content and the durable storage service that really got us. Because EBS is also a pretty durable service, but this use case with PDFs and other web content is perfect for S3. We're not going to use a database. We're definitely not going to use this because it's not durable. And EBS is really kind of one-to-one between EC2 instances. So not the best use case for this. So it's going to be S3. Good. And then you can turn on versioning. You can turn on MFA delete. You can replicate the database. Notice, by the way, that they do have kind of a general statement about if you need temporary storage that's super fast, use instant storage. That's the storage that comes for free with certain EC2 instance types. If you want multi-instance storage because you want to share an HTML directory with 1,000 web servers, that's going to be EFS. That's the Elastic File System. That's NFS. If you want highly durable, that's going to be S3. And it could be EFS, but I got to tell you, EFS is way more expensive than S3 for the value, right? So if you need performance, EFS might be your deal, but usually S3 is good enough. And if you want static content, data, or web content, again, S3 is the best. You could fall back to EFS if you needed more performance systems, which you're going to pay a lot more for EFS than you are for S3. Okay. Okay. Same thing. Let's read it out and then we'll dissect it. Okay. And you can still share your answers if you want to. I see a bunch of people put A and E. Okay. So let's just take a look at the other answers just to make sure we have some exclusion here. EC2 instances in a private subnet can connect with the internet only if they have an elastic IP. Well, what do you actually need if you're on a private subnet and you want to connect to the internet? What do you have to use? What network device? It's not an EIP. I don't even think you can put an EIP on a private subnet.
NAT gateway.
A NAT gateway. So Nagabrathi, that's correct. And then what's the problem with C? The allowed block size is between a /16 and a /27. What's wrong with that statement? What is the range? It's a /16 and a / what?
28, I think.
Amy, that's exactly correct. It is a /28, Matthew, as well. Remember, it's +12. So /16 plus 12 is a /28, right? So you can actually get down to 16 IP addresses on a subnet, not 32. All right, subnets span 2 availability zones. Is that correct? So consider this. Availability zones are physical data centers. Your subnet has IP information associated with it, physical IP information. It has to sit in one and only one data center. You know why? Because somewhere out there, there's a physical network card attached to your server, and it needs to be in one location. It can't span a bunch of data centers. So if availability zones are data centers, a subnet can only sit in one data center. If you want to span to another data center, you got to connect to a second subnet, right? So then the rest of this is that every subnet you create is automatically associated with the main route table is absolutely true. You can change that if you want to, but that is true by default. And then each subnet maps to a single availability zone. Well, this is obviously the counterpoint to this, right? So there it is. Now I just made all that big preamble. What if I was wrong? I'm just kidding. We're there. Okay. Note that you can actually create a custom route table per subnet if you so desire. So it's not like you have to use the VPC subnet. You can create your own your route table if you want to. Okay. Let's see, JP, you asked a question. You said, hold on, let's go back to that because I didn't want to forget that. Where's the best place to find the system properties of all AWS services? So just to say, like, John does a really good job of this, is that if you go over here and look at John's, oh God, where are they? Hold on. Sorry, I'm thinking about this for a second. Oh, his cheat sheets, here they are. See the cheat sheets over here? Cheat sheets. So what I would do is I would go to the exam guide and maybe just capture which services we're talking about, but you have a general feel. EBS, EC2, CloudFront, S3. So if you want to like grab the cheat sheets for that, you can actually do comparisons of certain services he has out here. But like if you're looking for S3, just click on S3. And this will give you basically the key, just the key aspects. But I want you to be forewarned, JP. There is there's a lot of information out here. Like this is like 7 pages worth of information. Okay. So
Okay.
I might just skim the surface of it, not necessarily try to memorize it, just kind of like read it, say, look, I looked at it, and just, pick up on a few key facts. I got to tell you, the practice exams are still going to kind of be your like key things. But if you keep getting hung up on a service, then go look at the cheat sheet.
Yeah, I think my problem is that I'm not sure I can see the logic of all these things, It's trying to find something where perhaps I could get to the root concepts of the services, but okay.
If you
Complex things with long descriptions.
Yeah. If you have your student guide, by the way, from the class you took, that
Yep.
also is probably a more condensed way to hone in on those services,
Okay,
because they'll only be probably at most 10 slides on a service. And they'll
Okay.
have notes in there that will tell you the key things relevant for this level, right?
all right. Thank you.
Yeah. By the way, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, bookshelf.vitalsource.com is the place to go to log in. You should have all gotten an email with your license key, and then, ignoring obviously the fact that I have too many here. But if you're doing architect on AWS, and I'm sorry, there's going to be so many languages here, it's usually mind melting. There's a student guide. This is 6.8.28. I think 7.0 is actually out now, but just, to give you an example. if you open this guide, by the way, it'll allow you to zero in on things like automation, caching, storage, etc. So just know that you can find what you're looking for. And the student guide will typically have like notes attached to it. So if we get into this and let's say we go to the next page, if there's notes attached to it, you'll see them at the bottom. Okay. So that's another place to kind of look and dive in.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Next one. I'm going to read this one off. You have a decoupled application using EC2 auto scaling groups S3 and SQS. Whew. EC2, S3, SQS auto scaling. The solutions architect designed the architecture in a way that the EC2 instances are going to consume messages from the SQS queue, and you want it to automatically scale up and down based on the number of messages in the queue. We've seen this before in one of our answers. Which of the following statements, though, is false about SQS? So I'm going to just forewarn you, this requires you to know the difference between standard queues and FIFO queues. FIFO stands for first order and first out and guarantees the order of messaging. That should be enough. So based on that, what's the answer?
See?
Right. If FIFO queues guarantee the order of messages, that means standard queues do not. Both of them, by the way, guarantee the message is going to be processed at least once, but FIFO's guarantee that it will be done exactly once. Right? It's going to guarantee that message is going to get processed exactly one time. So the answer is that C, standard queues preserve the order of messages. That's literally what a FIFO queue is for. So, right, standard queues don't do that. Using SQS to build a distributed application with decoupled components, as several of you answered before, you know that SQS is a great decoupler, just like a load balancer is a great decoupler, right? You know that standard queues provide at least once delivery because both of them do. The difference is that FIFO also provides exactly once delivery. Okay. So you just have to know a little bit about SQS to get that to function. Notice that John kind of dropped the ball on giving the wrong answers a little bit more explanation. Hold on one second. I have to send him a note on this one. Hey man, need a little bit more explanation here on this one. Okay. All right, this one I'll let you read. Grab this really quick. Whenever you're ready, let me know your answer.
Looks like C.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about it. All right, so first of all, it said persistent block storage. So what does that eliminate right off the bat?
Instant store.
EC2 instant storage.
Instant store.
Perfect. I love hearing that. A cacophony of instant storage. No, right? Perfect. So then you know EBS is going to be your friend. Now, you do have to know, like, what does EBS use to encrypt? And so let me just be super clear about this. Everything but S3 uses KMS to encrypt. S3 can use KMS, but S3 also has what's called server-side encryptions because S3 was the service that predated the key management system. So KMS is the encryption key management system. Everything uses KMS to encrypt except for S3, which can use its own native encryption methodology. Okay. So just note that little sweet little fact right there. Now, that being said, you know that has to be EBS, so it's not going to be the instant storage options. And then you know it's going to use KMS because, well, I just told you, you might think that this is an option, but SSC is only available for S3. Right? And it's SSC S3, SSC KMS, SSC. Oh, what's the other one? CMK? I can't remember the third one. So, well, let's check just in case I'm wrong, because maybe I'm just over here hitting the hash pipe and just making up answers. All right. So, Elastic Block Store with KMS. that was kind of a strange statement, wasn't it, Amy? Yeah. All right. All right, so I'll let you run on this one too. Now, hold on. Hold on. Some of you put D on here. Are you sure? Are you sure it's D? Why wouldn't you just go in and increase the allocated storage? I don't understand. Wouldn't you just go in and increase the disk space for the DB instance?
That would interrupt the database.
What? No.
I
I
think
don't.
we,
I don't know. I don't know about that. Oh
Oh,
yeah,
it's-
no, it is D actually. I'm messing around. So
why it's not B? Because the regular database, we can increase the storage, correct?
right, like you mean like if it was on EC2, Gayatri, can you just increase the storage?
Yeah, regularly we use, but I'm not sure about RDS.
So with RDS, the problem with that is that with RDS, you can't log into the operating system. So here they're testing whether or not you can log into the operating system on RDS, which you can't, right? So the best way to do it, and it's not the only way, just to say this, is to go in, change the database settings and say, look, I want you to scale the storage by 20% when it hits like 80% or 100%. In other words, RDS, since it's a platform as a service and not infrastructure as a service, you don't get access to the operating system. And so you go in and you change the platform settings and say, look, I want you to auto scale storage. Now that's just something you would have to know by messing around with RDS, or, for like me on a Friday night, just reading the documentation because you're bored, right? You just have to know that about the service. So that's just a pure straight up service test. Modifying to provisioned IOPS. Oh, that's the other thing. Sorry. Gayatri. What does the question say? I didn't state that fully. What does the question say with the least operational overhead? So you can still manually increase disk space, because that's why I was saying it's not the only method, but enabling auto scaling has the least operational overhead, right? So you can actually just let the system do it for you. That's why that's the right answer. You can actually go into the web interface or using the API and turn the dial on storage manually if you want to, but they're saying which one is going to give you the least operational overhead. So that's why that's the right answer, Gayatri, but you can actually turn the dial on it.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, sorry. Again, I need to be very specific, right? That's what the question's asked for. As far as going to provision IOPS, well, if you want to spend more money, but that's not going to help your disk space issue. That's just going to increase the performance of the disk you have. That's one cool thing, by the way, is that you can convert from GP3 over to IO2 while the database is there. It's kind of nifty. Changing the default storage engine of the DB instance parameter group to MyISOM. I'm pretty sure that does like really horrible things to the MySQL database, but I'm speculating on that one. Let's go take a look at what the wrong answers say. This is just a storage engine for MySQL. It will increase disk space. That's true. Increase the storage allocation. and Errol said this as well, by the way, it might cause degradation on the system. And then changing to provision IOPS will improve disk performance, but it won't increase your disk space problem. They were so happy, by the way, AWS was 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, when they announced that they had auto scaling for RDS. It was like all over the thing. They were so ecstatic about that. And I can see why. Okay, stick with me about 20 or 30 more minutes. We're gonna take a break and then we're gonna take another run. All right, so SA's got designing a hot HA environment for an application. They plan to host the applications on EC2 instances within an auto scaling group. So this is not containers, this is not Lambda, right? One of the conditions requires data stored on root EBS volumes to be preserved if an instance terminates. So in other words, if you delete the EC2 instance, they don't want the disk to go away. How do we solve that? All right, good. Seeing a bunch of D's. Okay. So enabling termination protection. So then this is the question, right? Oh, wait, sorry. I don't know why I did that because actually it's not correct.
Yeah, I was just about to change my answer.
Not sure where my brain was at actually just now. All right, here's the problem. So termination protection, by the way, all that's going to do is it's going to prevent you from being able to delete the instance, the EC2 instance. In other words, you have to go in and remove termination protection before you can actually delete the instance. So it becomes a two-step process. So programmatically, by the way, you then have to check for termination protection, disable it, and then you can turn the instance off. So that prevents you from deleting resources that are like super sensitive. I got to tell you, for a lot of databases, I will turn on termination protection. So that way, if someone, you can't accidentally delete the database, right? Now, using an ASG to suspend health checks is a bad idea because then it won't be able to tell whether the instances are healthy. So it's definitely not C. And plus, what does that have to do with, I don't know, preserving instances? Replicating data volumes to S3, that's a bad idea. Just take snapshots. You don't need data sync for that. You could just take snapshots. But I mean, that's just going to give you backups. They're saying we want you to preserve the EBS volumes. Okay. Well, the only way to do that is you have to tell the EBS volume that I do not want you to delete on termination of the EC2 instance. So there's the delete on termination attribute for EC2, sorry, for EBS that says, hey, if EC2 gets deleted, don't delete the volume, right? And so this way, by the way, your volumes will stay in even as the EC2 instances are deleted. I just want to point this out. This in general, by the way, is also a huge point of cost overrun for people because they'll have a bunch of unassociated EBS volumes just sitting in their set that no one knows what they're used for. So snapshots are a better option. But anyway, sorry, I wasn't really paying attention for a second, is that you want to make sure that you set the delete on termination attribute to false. Okay. Notice, by the way, here it is on the dashboard, right? You can actually set delete on termination to preserve the volume. So when if you're going through the web interface, it gives you this option to do this with the disks. Okay. Company's going to use a durable storage service to store on-premise database backups to the cloud. To move their backup data, they need to use a service that can store and retrieve objects through standard file storage protocols for quick recovery. Which of the following is going to allow them to take their on-premise backups and move them to the cloud and use standard file storage protocols? There's a very clear answer here. Even without looking at the answers, I know what the answer is in my head.
Uh,
Michael, I think you might be on mute.
yeah, Michael, we can't hear you.
Thank you. The boom mic was knocked down. All right, we know it's not EBS volumes because this is on-premise data. EBS is only on cloud, right? It's not on-premise. So B is out. Now, then we're left with 3 answers. 2 of them are storage gateway. 1 of them is Snowball Edge. It's definitely not Snowball because Snowball doesn't actually use standard protocols, right? And we're definitely not backing up to Glacier. So, because they said they want quick recovery, right? So we're going to take Snowball Edge, which by the way, is not really even a storage device. It's more of a compute device. I think it only has 8 terabytes of storage. We're taking that thing off, right? By the way, if you didn't know that, right, that could be hard to exclude, but Snowball Edge is not going to be our friend here. Now, the storage gateway has 3 modes: tape, file server, and volume server. So that's a virtual machine that runs on premise in VMware that will replicate data either to S3 or to Glacier. Now, storage gateway, by the way, has been around for a long time. Not a lot of people use it or know about it. And the file gateway in particular uses standard like file server protocols, SMB, right? CIFS. I don't know if it does NFS actually. It might do NFS. Oh, actually it does NFS. Haha, look at that. It does it right there. Okay. So, because basically it runs a Samba server and an NFS server. And so it allows you to share with Windows or Linux devices natively. Okay. So if you don't know about the storage gateway, you definitely want to jump into this storage gateway cheat sheet. You definitely want to at least skim the first couple pages because the storage gateway, those questions, there were like 5 questions on my last essay exam last year on this whole thing. Okay. But the storage gateway comes in 3 flavors. It can act as a tape library. It can act as a file server. It can act as a volume server where it actually shares disks out on premise, which is actually pretty cool. If you do the disk thing, by the way, you have to give it disks from a local storage system. So figure that out. Okay. Okay. Number 15. A media company recently launched their newly created web application. Many users tried to receive the website, but they're receiving a 503 service unavailable error. They tracked the EC2 instance status and saw that capacity is reaching its maximum limit. And it's unable to process requests. So to gain insights from the application's data, they need to launch a real-time analytics service. Huh? What just happened?
I think D.
Well, it could be.
Because the real time, correct? So data stream on top of it lambda.
Gayatri, you're definitely right. The minute you see the words real time, stream, like analytics, real time, they're either talking about Kinesis or the managed Kafka service, which is called MSK. Right? I think it's like managed service for Kafka, right? Those are the only real-time streaming like systems that Amazon has. Now, if they were talking just about analytics and they weren't talking about real-time, you could be talking about Redshift, you could be talking about Athena, you could be talking about QuickSight. There's a bunch of things you could be talking about. But when they say real-time, they are definitely talking about Kinesis. So this definitely takes 1 and 3 off the table, right? Because S3 is out the door at this point in time. Because S3 is awesome, but it's not real-time. It's not going to work for that. So then we've got the data fire hose and we've got data streaming. But literally, if they're looking for a real-time analytics service and they want to like process requests, it really is actually streaming that they're looking for. Firehose is so that you can accept data and dump it into a database. Streaming is so that you can take data and do reporting on it and analyzing it in real time, like you can analyze the data stream, right? And so it seems like that, like D is what we're really looking for here. And you know, Lambda can do that processing because every time he wants to trigger it, everything something's written to the stream, a Lambda would just be triggered for that. But S3 is excluded simply because it cannot handle real time. It just can't. So you're going to either have to use Kinesis Firehose or data stream. If you want to read it in real time, they're going to have to use basically data stream. If you want to dump it into a database, then that's what you would use Firehose. All right, let's see what it says here. Real-time streaming service, gigabytes of data, that's true. 10 batches in a shard, that's a little too deep, right? Let's see. So Firehose in real time, Lambda can't be set as its destination, right? Because it's mainly for data stores, right? You can actually have Lambda functions run inside of Firehose, but that's for ETL, it's not for like data sets, right? So you have to use stream processing. This is primarily used for stream processing, not actual consumption. So you have to use Kinesis data stream. You can't use Firehose for this. Firehose is really for dumping data out of a stream. Let's see. S3 isn't going to work just because you need Kinesis to process real-time data. So exactly what I just said. Little Kinesis cheat sheet. Okay. You get a large telecom company. It's got to run analytics against all the combined log files from an ALB as part of regulatory requirements. Which AWS services can be used together to collect logs and then perform log analysis?
Maybe EMR.
So you're thinking D, Gayatri?
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's analytics and large, correct? So maybe EMR.
Well, remember, EMR is more of a platform as a service. So if you have to choose between infrastructure as a service, which is what EC2 is, and EMR, which is a platform as a service, right? AWS every single time is going to tell you, we want you to use a platform as a, they're going to ask you to step up, right? Plus EMR is designed for large batch analytics, which log file processing is definitely large set, large batch, large set analytics. So it's perfect. So your reasoning there is solid. Why S3? Why not like use EBS volumes or DynamoDB? Well, first of all, DynamoDB is not built for that. So mechanical sympathy. Don't use the screwdriver to try and hammer a nail. Don't use a hammer to try and undo a screw. That's mechanical sympathy. That's a concept that Amazon talks about a lot. If the database is designed for no SQL statements, it's not designed for log aggregation, right? So here, S3 is a perfect use case for a large swath of log files that you later want to do analytics against. And then EMR has mentioned before for all those reasons. So let's see, because maybe we're just wrong, right? By the way, I've done that before where I've gone through and given all of my justifications and my reason. Actually, you saw that earlier, right? I was like, but I kind of questioned that last one where I'm like, I'm certain this is the answer. And the answer is wrong. Oh, it didn't happen very often, but the answer is wrong, despite my very clear reasoning, right? Let's see, to say this. Log analysis can be automatically provided by EMR, which is more economical than hosting it custom in EC2. So remember, Amazon is going to repeatedly try and take operational offload and complexity from you. So again, if there's a comparison between a platform as a service and an infrastructure as a service, they're going to want you to take the platform. If there's a comparison between software as a service and a platform as a service, they're going to want you to take the software as a service every single time, right? So this, hands down, you know, Amazon has won to $50 billion a year in revenue because that's what they offer, is the promise of taking all this operational headache off of your shoulders. And a little bit more about an EMR cluster if you want to really dive into that. Okay. So a company has an e-commerce application that saves the transaction logs to an S3 bucket. You are instructed by the CTO to configure the application to keep the transaction logs for 1 month for troubleshooting purposes and then purge the logs. What tool would you use in S3 to set up data tiering and data classification and data rollover?
The life cycle configuration rule.
So C, good, Guthrie. We have one answer. Anybody else?
I'm thinking C.
C. What is cores, by the way, in answer number 1?
Cross origin replication service.
So cross origin resource sharing, because there is a replication service, so you're not wrong there about S3. But cross origin resource sharing is a concept that exists outside of S3. This is about web applications. So if I am sharing image files from my web server and somebody starts using all of my image files in their web server, they are trying to cross domains, crossing origins by pulling their image files into their web pages. The HTTP specification has a thing that prevents that from happening, so people can't just steal your image files into their web server, because you're basically hosting images for them now, right? Called cores, which is cross-origin resource sharing. The problem with this is that if you are coming from another server trying to access files in S3, which is essentially another server, you've got to enable or disable cores respectively in order to get that to function. But this doesn't apply here because we're not doing HTTP posts. We're managing the back end. This is not a front end thing. So A is out. Create a new IAM policy for the bucket that deletes the logs after a month. What's wrong with creating? What do IAM policies govern?
Access. to
Access.
service.
Yep, access permissions. So that's not going to apply here. That doesn't control storage, right? And then add a new bucket policy on the S3 bucket. Well, that's again permissions and storage. So even by process of elimination, we could get to the lifecycle configuration manager rules, but honestly, that's just straight up the answer, right? And by the way, the lifecycle policy rules will not only just move between different data classifications like data tiers, they'll delete your files too. If you're like, hey man, after 30 days, gone, you can do that. Oh, S3, Amazon, you got to stop showing this thing. Reduced redundancy, by the way, is still available inside of the console, but don't use it. They're going to retire it here soon. The rest of these, you should know the 6 classifications of standard, infrequent access, in one zone infrequent access, Glacier, and Glacier Deep Archive, and intelligent tiering, which is really not a data tier per se. It's actually more of one that moves data between the other tiers. So, I mean, it is a storage class, but it operates very differently in that it'll move it to the other storage classes. Okay, I'm gonna let you read this one. Okay, so this is the question they're really asking. Is transit, so looking at the arrow in pink, is transitive peering allowed if A is connected to B and C is connected to B? Can A talk to C? That's what they're asking you, right? And the answer is no. I don't know why, but Amazon does not support what's called transitive peering, meaning if I'm connected to B and B is connected to C, why can't I just run through B to get to C? And the answer is no, they don't do that. There's a number of security reasons as to why they don't. But if you want A and C to talk together, even though they're both connected to B, you have to connect A and C together. Right? And so that's basically what everyone is suggesting by putting A as the answer, is they're saying, you know what, we're going to connect prod and dev together because that's yellow and blue, because UAT, by the way, is in red. And even though UAT can both talk to prod and dev, we have to basically connect them together to make that happen. Okay. So notice it says overlapping CIDR blocks. You definitely don't want overlapping IP ranges. That's what CIDR stands for, basically, is IP ranges. Create a new entry to prod and no. Do nothing since they're already, no, that's transitive peering. That's literally the thing you cannot do, right? So in this particular case, right, it's create a new VPC peering connection. By the way, there's another service that's been out for a minute that you can use to connect VPCs together. Does anyone know what the service is called? It shows up on occasion on the exam, but very rarely. So I'm gonna type this in the chat. It's called Transit Gateway.
Isn't that just when a transit gateway, is that another name for like a VPN? Is it the same concept? Or?
Nope. Transit Gateway will act as a routing aggregator for VPN, Direct Connect, and for VPCs. So Transit Gateway is a regional service, but it'll actually stick network cards into the VPC subnets, and and you only need one per availability zone. And then it will allow you to basically interconnect all these things together. It'll route things together. Okay, let's do one more, and then let's take a break. Any questions on that one? Okay, last one, and then we're gonna take a break, and then we'll come back and do a little run. A solutions architect is formulating a strategy for a startup that needs to transfer 50 terabytes of on-premise data to Amazon S3. The startup has a slow network transfer speed between its data center and AWS, which is going to cause a bottleneck for migration. So what should you use if you need to get 50 terabytes up into the cloud, but your network is too slow? There's only really one answer.
The transfer accelerator.
Wouldn't it be the snowball? Oh,
No, the
sorry.
D, the transfer S3 transfer acceleration.
All right, so Gayatri, you were saying D, and Errol, you're saying C, right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so let me ask you this. What does transfer acceleration actually do?
I think it speeds up the process.
Okay, good. So let's talk about that for a second, because understanding this will help inform your answer. So let's say over here in pink is our data center, because pink is the manliest of colors. And then orange over here is, us going back to AWS, right? What ends up happening is that if you have a network pipe that's represented in purple, if you could go all the way back to AWS and you are constrained by that bandwidth, right? Because that leaves your data center at a purple rate of speed. If you enable transfer acceleration, what's going to happen is that you're still constrained by this purple rate of speed, but instead what happens is that now you're actually going to hit one of Amazon's edge servers, one of the CloudFront servers, and that box is going to be closer than Amazon's data center. And at that point in time, you're going to be at a green rate of speed, because this is Amazon's rate of speed, which is faster than the internet. So let me ask you this. If you enable transfer acceleration, are you still going to be constrained by the speed in your data center?
Yeah, partially, right?
100% actually, you are constrained. You can't go faster than your pipe, right? if you have a water hose of a certain size and you dump it into a water main, even though that water main can accept a lot more water, you're still only going to go as fast as your as your little garden hose, right? So just know that you're still constrained even with transfer acceleration turned on. Because remember, this is your maximum speed. Your lowest speed is your maximum speed of any portion of the traversal, right? So unfortunately, transfer acceleration isn't the answer. So in order to actually make this work, right, typically you're going to need to do an import job with a snowball device.
Was
Because-
the 50 terabytes a clue, or was that sort of like, because don't we have to know certain limits of the various snowball devices?
There's only one to remember. It's 80 terabytes. And it's actually
Got it.
73.
Thank you.
It's actually 73 usable, Amy. And they will ask you that. It says 80 on the marking material. It's actually 73. So they'll say, we have 70 terabytes available. And you'll be like, okay, that sounds great. Then they'll say, oh, we have, 80 terabytes. And you're like, oh, maybe the snowball will still, and the answer is no, the snowball can't do 80 terabytes. It does 72 usable terabytes. So that's why they told
Gotcha.
you 50.
Thank you.
If they had said, by the way, 200, snowball would still be the answer because you can actually order multiple snowballs. If they said a petabyte, then you're looking at a snowmobile. Don't even get me started. That's the truck, by the way. That's the truck that comes with that
Okay.
drives up to your data center and you throw cables in your data. Anyway, that's a whole thing. But regardless, snowball is going to be the answer. As long as it's like only a couple hundred terabytes, like maybe 200 or less, snowball is still going to work. You just need multiple snowballs. But for a single snowball, as long as it's about 70 terabytes or less, you're fine. Now, the storage gateway, file gateway isn't going to work. Number B is because it's still going to be constrained by your bandwidth out of the data center. And the migration hub discovery agent is just a discovery agent. I'm sitting here thinking about this. It's an application discovery agent. I don't think it does any data transfer. You'd have to use SMS, the server migration service, or the data center migration service, which was actually just announced last week. So, okay. Any questions on that one or anything that we've talked about thus far before we take a break? Okay. I'm going to give your brains a bigger break this time because we've been running at this. But then when we come back, it's going to be a 50-minute run straight up until lunchtime, and then we're going to stop. Okay. So let's take a 20-minute break. Let's say it's 10:50 right now, Eastern by my crazy clock. We're going to come back at 10 after. I'll put a little timer up. Okay. So take a 20-minute break. Please step away from your computer if you get a chance. And we'll see you in 20 minutes. We're back.
And we actually have access.
Okay. So now that we're back from our break. Hello, Hassan. How's it going?
Good, good, good. If you can hear me.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Just so you know, we went through all the logistical stuff at the very first hour, and we've been spending the last like almost 2 hours actually going through exam questions and kind of deconstructing them.
Awesome.
We've done a little bit less and less kind of exam question deconstruction, and more just answering and kind of letting people do it themselves. So
Sure.
that's what we're doing for the remaining kind of like 50 minutes or so. We're hard stopping right before noon. So,
Nope.
And the recordings will be shared for people who registered for the class. So
Hey, quick question for you.
absolutely.
Just wanted to double check what you had said. The study plan that you recommend is to take a practice test, go through it in review check mode, and then keep taking it until you're getting 90%, right?
Right. Take one set of the review mode sets. There's
Okay.
like 6 of them. Take one of them until you can
Okay.
get 90%. Once you get 90 percentile plus on it, then move to another set of questions. Do at least 2, possibly 3 if you have time. But Ryan was sharing earlier that a bunch of people actually have a deadline of getting this done by next Wednesday. If your deadline is next
Okay.
Wednesday, you're gonna spend 3 hours a day studying if you want to pass the
Yeah.
exam. Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. And just a reminder that everybody should have access to the Tutorials Dojo practice exams that we're going through. If you don't have an email in your inbox, you might need to go to the website tutorialsdojo.com, create an account. You have to use last name _ first name at bah.com. you know, the standard email address that you guys use, not the numbers, not the employee ID. And then once that happens, your names have already been added to the list if you register for this class. And so within 24 hours, you'll get an email that says, hey, you're registered. So, and then don't worry, JP, I hadn't forgotten about showing just kind of where the practice exam questions are for those who don't yet have access. If you run into any problems getting your practice exams, you don't have them by tomorrow morning, you can actually send an email to this web address. It's called web address. Just making up all kinds of names over here. support@webhsolutions.com. Hold on 1 second. My Roomba is over there complaining about something. Anyway, so just know that send an email to them and just say, hey, I don't really see my exams. Can you check on it? And just give them your email address. And of course, you'll have it if you send an email. Then they'll go from there. Okay. All right. In Amazon EC2, you can manage your instances from the moment you launch them up to their termination. You can flexibly control your computing costs by changing the EC2 instance state. Which of the following statements is true regarding EC2 billing? Oh. Remember, costs, right, is a portion of the exam, like 18% or something. So A, B, C, D, or E, what are the two options that we're going to choose that are true about billing? All right, Nagabarathi, let's see. You've got, you will be billed when your reserved instance is in a terminated state, and you will be billed when your on-demand instance is in a pending state. Okay, good. Anybody else?
I was thinking C and D, but not confident.
Not confident? All right. So maybe a second guess for. Say it again, Errol.
I'm not confident on E. I was thinking that C.
Okay. Let's check it out and see if we can get some learning on. Okay. So here's the interesting thing. You're going to pay for reserved instances, whether they're running or not. Right. So that's a true statement about billing because you commit to a 1 or 3 year period. Right. So which means you're going to pay for that instance, whether you're using or not. You're going to commit to paying it for a year or 3 years. You may say, why would I do that? Well, I mean, if you know for certain you have a server that's going to stay up for a year or 3 years and you want up to a 72% discount, that's going to be worth it, right? Imagine instead of paying $1, you're paying, 27 cents, 28 cents, right? So C is definitely true, right? Going to be billed when the reserve instance is in a terminated state, right? Now, you're going to be billed when your on-demand instance is preparing to hibernate with a stopping state. So anything that has you in running, right? In a running state, that's when you usually get billed, right? So you get billed if it's starting up, right? You get billed when it's running. And if it transitions to any other state, right? Typically, you're also going to get billed. But that's mainly for on demand. If it's a spot instance and it's preparing to stop, by the way, you're not going to get billed. You know why? Because Amazon initiated that stop. That's what they do with spot instances typically, right? And so if you're moving into the stopping state with spot instances, they're not going to charge you. You will not be billed for any instance usage while an instance is not in the running state. That's not true. If you're in the running state, you're going to get billed, but also there's transitions there that you're also going to get billed for, right? So in this case, it's actually B and C. So you're going to be billed when your on-demand instance is preparing to hibernate with a stopping state, not a stopped. You're going to be billed for a reserved instance no matter what state it's in. So here are the states, by the way. So when you launch it, it starts in pending, and then eventually it hits running. And then you can either reboot it, or you can shut it down, or you can stop it. Now, rebooting is a transitory action. So is stopping, so is shutting down, meaning they are changing states. But remember, rebooting is just going to come right back up. So it's a transitory state, so it should come right back to running, right? So there's 3 transitory states: stopping, shutting down, and rebooting. And then there's end states, which is either terminated or stopped. Otherwise, you're either getting ready to run, you're running, or you're either rebooting, shutting down, or stopping, and you're either shut down or you're stopped. Now you might say, what's the difference between shut down and stopped? Stopped means you just turned it off. Terminated means you gave it back to Amazon. I mean, you said you didn't want this capacity anymore, you gave it back. Stop, you still have your capacity reservation, but you said, I'm just going to keep it, right? So the option that says that you're going to be billed when it's prepared is correct because the instance state is stopping. You will not be billed, right? You will not be prepared if it's preparing to stop. You will still be billed if it's preparing just to hibernate, right? So that's the kind of like the catch there, is that it's going into hibernate mode. The option says you're going to be billed when your reserved instance is terminated because reserved instances are going to apply regardless. You have committed to consistently pay. You're not going to be billed if your instance is in a pending state because that's starting up. You're not going to be billed if your instance is preparing to stop with the stopping state, right? Especially for spot instances. And then you're going to be billed for any usage is incorrect because you can still be billed if your instance is preparing to hibernate with a stopping state. So let me clarify this. There's 2 states that you get charged for. And that's going to make this easy. You're going to be charged for running, and you're going to get charged for stopping for hibernation. That's it. Those are the only 2 things you're going to get charged for other than reserved instances. You're just going to charge you the other time. But as far as states go, for any other instance outside of reserved instances, you're only going to get charged for running, and you're going to get charged for stop hibernate. You're not going to get charged for stopping, right? If you're just normal stopping. Does that make sense to everybody? Thanks, Amy. Good. We got a little thumbs up. Okay. Next set. A company installed sensors to track the number of people who visit a park. The data is sent to Kinesis Streams with the default settings for processing, in which a consumer is configured to process the data every other day. You notice that the S3 bucket's not receiving all of the data that's being sent to the Kinesis stream. You check the sensors to see if they are properly sending the data to Kinesis and verify that the data is actually indeed coming from the sensors and it's landing in Kinesis. But for some reason, you're seeing gaps in the Kinesis processing, even though the consumer is configured to process every other day. What's the problem? What's the problem with Kinesis? Because that's what they're asking.
I think it's only holds like 24 hours. The C.
Ryan, shots fired. No. So yeah, so if your account was hacked, by the way, you got a whole different set of problems. But you're right. By default, if you don't change any settings, I think records only last for 24 hours on Kinesis. I think you can keep them for up to a week, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I bet you they'll tell us here in a second, right? Now remember, the problem in the sensors has already been verified. S3, by the way, S3 stores the data for 1 day and then moves it to Glacier by default. That's her. So even by elimination, you could probably land at the Kinesis answer. Now, this is a real-time data stream, right? So the default is 24 hours. The maximum is a week. So 168 hours, right? Now, the rest of this, as far as like problems in the sensors and S3 data stores, account was hacked, obviously is not correct. But it does require you to know, and they made a pointed statement here, right? They said with default settings for processing. Whenever they do that, they are asking you to put in your head the default settings for NACLs, the default settings for Kinesis, the default settings for security groups. When they preface you like that, they want you to know what the default settings are. So just key in on that. Do you need to know all the default settings? No, probably at least for the things that I mentioned, right? Including some EC2 and EBS settings. Okay. Or you could just blame it on hackers, you know, whatever you want to do there. All right. So company needs to collect gigabytes of data per second from, you know, a variety of sources to gain insights on product offerings and update the user experience. To meet this requirement, you have developed an application hosted on an auto scaling group of spot EC2 instances, which processes the data and stores the results to DynamoDB and Redshift. The solution should have a built-in enhanced fan out feature, which means that What service can you use to collect and process large streams of data records in real time with the least amount of administrative overhead, but that allows you to farm that data out, like shotgun it out to multiple sources? Now, I just want to note here that it says data records in real time. There's only 2 services in AWS that support real time.
I think Kafka and Kinesis, but I think here, since we are handling data, probably Kafka.
Now, what's the other qualifier on the question, by the way?
Real time?
Well, we already said real time, right? What's the other one? What did they
Least
capitalize?
administrative
Sana.
overhead.
Least administrative overhead, right?
At least yeah.
So which one has the least administrative overhead?
Oh, okay. Kinesis then. I think Kafka, we need to manage a lot.
Yeah, this is going to be speculative because while I have friends who have launched Kafka, I have not launched it in AWS. So I've never used the managed streaming service of Kafka. I think it does actually have extra additional overhead. So let's take a guess here, because it did say least amount of overhead, right? And that's definitely going to be Kinesis, even though it's proprietary. So let's see what they say. Yep, they said the same thing, right? So it's not, although you can process it with MSK, it has a lot of administrative overhead. So remember those little
Kafka,
keywords.
You have to manage a lot. I never used AWS, but I used on-prem.
Yes, on premise. It's a lot of administration, actually.
Exactly.
Also note, by the way, that Kafka doesn't have a fan out feature by default. That doesn't mean you can't put a lot of consumers on the back end and consume it, but it doesn't have the ability to integrate with AWS services and kind of shotgun out to a bunch of things. You actually have to build those integrations yourself. That's a lot more administrative overhead. So it also won't have the built-in enhanced fan out feature. Because there were actually 3 requirements here: built-in enhanced, real-time, least amount of administrative overhead, right? For the data record collection service. Okay. I'm gonna let you read this one and then just like post your answers when you're ready.
I think B. Or
Okay.
because it says high scalable. Yeah,
said
I think
as
B.
well.
You think, sorry, Errol, was that you talking?
Yeah, I said B as well.
Okay.
Not
Okay. Let's do some elimination first. So Redshift is for analytics, so that's not going to work, right? At least for just the data store portion. RDS is not necessarily highly scalable, but it can be made highly available, right? Especially if query for real-time ranking. It's not really what the RDS service is for. Transactions, sure, but not that. Aurora could fit that role. And just to say this, Cognito, I think, has a service that has mobile push in it. That could work, actually. But is that the best one for highly scalable, highly available data store for real-time ranking? Still basically an SQL database. So I'd argue no, not for that one. So I'm gonna have to agree with B, right? Because DynamoDB would probably be your best option. And AppSync, I think it used to be a subservice of Cognito, basically. But AppSync manages everything to manage app data in real time, right? And that includes mobile pushes. So yeah, so that's just knowing which service is considered to be the most highly scalable and highly available, right? Okay. Company has established a dedicated network connection from its on-premise data center to cloud using Direct Connect, right? Also shorthanded as DX. The core network services, such as the domain name service and Active Directory services, are all hosted on premise. So in the company's data center, not in AWS. The company has new AWS accounts that will also require consistent and dedicated access to these services. Which of the following can satisfy this requirement with the least amount of operational overhead and in a cost-effective manner, right?
Let's see. Direct gateway network.
Yeah, so here's an interesting thing is that creating a new VPN connection would be unnecessary, right? Because we already have direct connect, so we don't really need that. Setting up a new direct connect connection for every other account, well, that definitely is not going to follow the rubric of least operational overhead and cost-effective manner. So then we're definitely left with our two answers, which is set up a new direct connect gateway and integrate it with the existing connection, which both of them have basically, right? But then they say one says we're going to use VPC peering and the other one says transit gateway. Which of those has the least amount of operational overhead?
I think transit gateway between accounts.
So I'm kind of interested on AWS's perspective because they've been pushing transit gateway. Because VPC peering actually does require a lot more administration to function, whereas transit gateway is a little bit more simple once you get it set up. So I'm kind of curious. Yeah, so transit gateway, right, is considered to kind of be the new kid on the block that makes things easier for you to connect your VPCs in AWS with VPN and direct connect connections on the other side, right? So.
And also, Michael, I think VPC peering needs 2 VPCs only on AWS to use it. Or can we do like an on-prem to AWS connection with VPC peering?
Well, what you can do is you could actually connect to the VPC that has the direct connect connection and just set up routes, from there, right? So you can't do transitive peering, but if all of the VPCs are connected to the VPC that has direct connect in it, you can route through that to the direct connect connection. So here, by the way, if you want to see direct connect, the way this functions is that you've got the customer firewall here, their direct connect connection, and that actually hooks in to what's called a public virtual interface through to a transit gateway. Notice, by the way, that they are running VPN over their direct connect connection. So VPN is actually running across the connection, which is why they're using a public VIF, by the way. Normally they would use a private. And then transit gateway, by the way, has stuck a network card in each of these VPCs in a subnet inside each availability zone. And so therefore we'll route to these and they can route back. So think of transit gateway as like a routing hub, if you will. So it can route both this way and this way. Okay. All right. An online stock trading company stock application that stores financial data in an S3 bucket has a lifecycle policy that moves older data to Glacier every month. There's a strict compliance requirement where a surprise audit can happen at any time and should be able to retrieve the required data in under 15 minutes in all instances, right? So your manager instructed you to ensure the retrieval capacity is available when you need it and should handle up to 150 megabytes of retrieval throughput. Now,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please, after you.
So I think since this is like a retrieval is shorter time, I think D and maybe.
Use expedited retrieval.
Yes, I think.
Okay. And then what's the second one?
I think the B.
Retrieve using Glacier Select. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Anybody else? Have a comment? An answer?
Yeah, I was thinking Glacier Shield. Wasn't sure.
Okay. I was actually thinking that perhaps, because I definitely think that D is an answer, because you need expedited retrieval, because bulk retrieval takes 5 to 12 hours. So that's not going to make your 15-minute time, right? Specify a range or portion of the financial data archive to retrieve. Well, that's kind of what Glacier Select does. You can actually do a subset of the data. I actually thought it was purchase, provision, and retrieval capacity, but I'm willing to go with your answer. Let's see what it is. Oops. I accidentally checked the first one. I got 3 answers there. Yeah. So expedited retrieval makes total sense, right? Because that's 1 to 3 minutes to restore. Purchasing provisioned retrieval capacity. So provisioning capacity is what is actually used to make sure that you actually have 150 megabytes of per second of like throughput, right? So you should like retrieve this capacity if your workload requires like predictable access. What this is that think of this as like buying reservations. You are buying a certain amount of like per gigabytes of like capacity. You are basically paying Amazon for priority restoration speed. That's what provision capacity is, right? So you can come in here and buy provision capacity, like buy added capacity units. I can't remember what they cost per capacity unit, but you can actually come in here and buy this.
So
So-
is this an option inside of Glacier?
Yeah,
Like
this is an option inside of Glacier. Yeah. Yeah, so JP bulk retrieval, which is 5 to 12 hours to restore something, costs you nothing. Expedited retrieval is 3 cents per gigabyte.
Thank you.
Yeah, by the way, here it says 5 to 12 hours for bulk retrieval. Select, by the way, allows you to perform filtering operations against like data directly in your data archive, right? So it allows you to filter against data. So a little bit of a deep dive into Glacier there, right? All right, so a company currently has an augmented reality mobile game that has a serverless backend. So Lambda, right? So it's using DynamoDB table, which was launched using the CLI to store all the data and information, and a Lambda function to pull the data from DynamoDB. Game is being used by millions of users each day. How would you design the application to improve its overall performance and making it scalable while keeping costs low, right? So this is going to be interesting. I'm not really sure what the requirements are here. How would you design it to improve performance and make it more scalable while keeping costs low? So we're going to improve performance, make it so it can scale and keep costs low. Isn't that an interesting trifecta, right?
C.
API
Yeah.
gateway, turn on the caching on frequently and enable DynamoDB global replication. That would make it globally scalable. Would that increase performance? Caching on frequently would increase performance. But it's definitely not DAX. DAX is expensive. CloudFront with DynamoDB, I don't even think you can set that as an option, right? And then SSO with authenticate users and have them directly access with single sign-on. That could happen, but my only issue is manually setting the provision read-write capacity. Like that doesn't fit. So by default, I think maybe like D is one of them. And since auto scaling is enabled to default, it says enable DAX. I gotta tell you, I just have an issue with DAX because it's actually more expensive. But let's see what they say. Maybe there's something here for us all to learn, or at least for me to learn. Right? Yeah, I thought so. Okay. So it's still enabled DAX, which kind of like threw me off. By default, I knew that auto scaling wasn't enabled, so that's not the default because they actually said they used the CLI for that. Ensure that auto scaling is able to increase the maximum provisioned read and write capacity. Still, DAX is relatively expensive. So DAX, by the way, is a in front of DynamoDB in-memory cache, right? DAX does all of the heavy lifting to add like additional, like basically high speed capacity to your like DynamoDB tables. So, you know, you can also, by the way, when you come in and set the caps for not just DAX, which is separate, right? But set it for the table itself. You can actually set your read and write capacity units if you want to, or you can have it auto scale from whatever range you want to, right? And so it'll scale in this case from 5 to 40,000 read and write capacity units as needed, but they actually just set it for read capacity, as you can see from the checkbox here, right? So they didn't actually set read and write capacity. Okay. So let's see, wait, sorry, let's read this in a little bit further. Auto scaling is not enabled by default, which we already knew that, but it didn't say anything about using the default settings of the CLI. So that question threw me off a little bit. Using an SSO and doing things manually, no, that's not going to work. CloudFront, right? You can't integrate CloudFront with DynamoDB, so that's accurate, right? So it really is API gateway in conjunction with the enabling the DAX accelerator and making sure auto scaling is enabled, right? So. All right. Things to remember, right? A company deployed several EC2 instances in a private subnet. The SA needs to ensure the security. Upon checking the inbound rules, she saw this configuration. This is the network access control list, stateless, right? All traffic is allowed. And then we've got custom TCP rule that denies traffic from a certain IP address on a certain port with a certain protocol. And then we see a catch-all for all traffic being denied.
I think allowed. I think allowed the C.
Okay, Gayatri, why do you think traffic will be allowed? What's your reasoning there?
Because it takes, I think allow is the first one, priority for all traffic. Then it will have play deny, since allow is the highest one, it takes high. I don't know.
I think the requests are processed in the order of the rule numbers. And if the first rule matches and it doesn't go and read the next rule, it just applies the first rule and take it from there.
Exactly. Once
The
traffic matches a rule, it's not going to do any further rule processing. So dead on, both of you, right? Is that it is actually going to process this first rule. It's not even going to read the second rule. So the traffic should be allowed by default. If you want to change that, this rule needs to be changed to 99 and put in front of the 100 rule, right? So it's going to be allowed.
So
Remember
you
that-
have the option to modify the rule number yourself.
Yeah, you can change it. You can shift it up or down. Yeah. You can either move the top rule down or move the middle rule up, whichever you want there. That star means, by the way, no matter what, that's going to be the bottom rule, which means if traffic doesn't match any known pattern, it's going to be denied. Okay. Here, by the way, is a quick little thing about security groups versus NACLs. One thing that you probably need to remember is that if you want to deny a specific IP range after you've allowed everybody to come in, you want to exclude somebody, you have to use NACLs for exclusion. You can't just pick on a particular IP range with security groups. Security groups can only allow a certain subset of traffic, but it's really hard to exclude traffic in a security group. You've got to use a NACL for that. Okay. All right, I'm gonna let you read this one and then post your answer in the chat if you don't mind. Okay. I see a couple of B's, right? So let's take a shot at these B's and see what it says, right? Okay. By default, with automated backups inside of RDS, what's the maximum like days of retention for an automated backup in RDS? Does anybody know? Let's see. Let's go take a look. Actually, let's take a field trip. Let's go take a look in the console. Do I have any RDS instances? Oh no, I think I cleared those out yesterday. Oh wow. Okay, let's go look at the documentation actually, since we have the links right there. I don't log back into all that. Okay. So here's the thing is that 35 days is the maximum retention period for automated backups inside of AWS, right? If you're using RDS. So if you want to backup like past 35 days, and by the way, it's just going to drop the oldest one, right? If you want something back beyond that, the question was basically saying, hey, which of the following can satisfy the requirement for a 90-day backup retention period? And so this one is possible, but it's going to be super complicated. Can't really configure RDS to do this kind of thing, right? But you can use AWS backup to take a daily snapshot and just retain it for 90 days. But you have to know that AWS backup exists, and that's easier to use than the other services, right? So, oh, actually, you cannot directly download or export a snapshot to S3. That's true. You can't export that. You have to copy it first. Yeah, but you can't actually do it. So basically the other solutions like could work indirectly, right? But you actually, this one just works like automatically. Links to all AWS cheat sheets. Hold on. Let's see what this one looks like. Huh. Well, that just went to EC2. I didn't look like that. That did exact what they thought it was going to do. Let's try that again. Nope, that went to EC2. That was not a link to all other cheat sheets. I think this is the link to all the cheat sheets, right? Yeah. Anyway. All right. We're only going to do like 2 or 3 more and then we're going to be done. Okay. I'm just going to check in for the last like few minutes. All right. So a major network, the TV network has a web application running on 8 T3 instances. The number of requests the application processes are consistent and it does not experience spikes in consumption. To ensure that 8 instances are running at all times, the SA should create an auto-scaling group and distribute load evenly between all instances. How can you satisfy the given requirements? So when you're ready, put your answer in, but take a look at the answers and see if you can figure it out. All right. So let's see what the answers are. So do you deploy 8 instances in one AZ behind a load balancer? Well, first of all, they all have a load balancer in them. So thankfully we have load distribution, right? Do we deploy 8 in one AZ? Do we deploy 4 in each of 2 availability zones in the same region? Do we do 4 in one region and then 4 in another region? Or do we deploy 2 in 4 regions behind elastic load balancers? Right? Now, D is technically capable, right? But I think most of you put B in here because you know that Amazon wants you to use at least 2 availability zones, but they don't need you to use 4. And you want them to be in the same region because load balancers will not span regions, right? Load balancers are locked to a region. If you need global load balancing, you have to mix regional ELBs with something called the global accelerator, which will give you global load balancing. but that's not what they said here. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody where that's not clear? All right, then. All right, I'm going to let you read this one just from start to finish.
Think A,
Think A, okay?
because it's a batch process, it can be interrupt anytime. So Spot instance we can use.
Good. See a bunch of people put A as well. Yeah, when it says it can be interrupted at any time, they're talking about Spot instances with an application, right? Especially if it's not priority, like it's a report or genomic data or something they're just doing continuously. That's withstanding interruptions is a trigger word for Spot, right, on these questions. Good. Okay, I'll let you do this one as well.
I think create a new launch configuration.
Okay. Good. So in order to use a new AMI, right? Do we need a new target group? Where do target groups actually run in, right? Let's check and see. Yeah. So all you need to do is just create a new launch configuration. So because they're already using auto scaling, right? But they want to add a new AMI. So all they really need to do is change the characteristics of what is being launched, not the instances themselves. So whether they're using launch templates or launch configurations, right? They're going to change, they're going to basically create a new launch template or launch configuration. There are two, by the way. I believe that templates are actually the more updated one, if I remember correctly, but launch configurations and templates can both be used. If you need to change the auto scaling group like the way the auto scaling group functions, not the individual AMIs, the EC2 instances, then you would change the auto scaling group policy, right? Which is different than the launch configuration or the launch template. Okay. Last few. Let you read this one as well. Go ahead and either state or place your answer in the chat. Good. All right. So Amazon has a funny thing where they actually take products that are actually sub-products and not actual products themselves. And they call it like names as if it's a standalone product. So Fargate works with the container service and the Kubernetes service. So since Docker's there, that's what they're talking about. So probably most likely they're going to talk about EKS Fargate as being because Fargate is the serverless version of EKS or ECS, which is the other container service. So Fargate, when you see Fargate, I don't know why they didn't just call it serverless, but it's serverless for those products. So oh God, that's actually a wrong answer. Who wrote that? Anyway, moving on. So EKS is not the right service just because it's not serverless by default. EFS, EBS are just storage systems, so that doesn't make any sense. Okay, last one, and then I'm just gonna do a quick check-in. We have a document sharing website using AWS as a cloud infrastructure. Free users can upload 5 gigabytes, while premium users can upload as much as 5 terabytes. Their application uploads the user files, which can have a max size of 1 terabyte to an S3 bucket. What's the best way for the application to upload the large files in S3? Like, what's the most optimized way for them to put files that are that large?
Multi-part.
Yeah. So multi-part upload, what it does is it's actually going to break the file into pieces, like however many pieces you want to run in parallel. It's going to upload the pieces independently to Amazon. Amazon's going to wait for all the pieces to show up, and then it's going to assemble the file and stick it on S3. So if you drop one of the connections, like connection number 9, those other pieces are actually still going to be out there. And when part 9 is pushed up, then Amazon's going to put the whole thing together and make it work. Okay. So multi-part upload. That's the answer. Okay. So we're going to stop there. It's 11:53. You feel everybody kind of slowing down. I know you've been pushing through it. There's one other thing I wanted to show you, especially for those who may not have access, is let's see. Practice exams. That's right. I think if I remember correctly, is it through scheduling? Hold on, taking a minute. I think you could schedule it here, but I remember they moved it. Hold on one second. All right, put this down. So they just moved everything over to a new website called Skill Builder. Oh, interesting. There's an internal error. Oh, Amazon apparently is having a little bit of a problem. Okay. Let's see if there's another way to get there. Maybe it'll pass. All right. One way we could go is that you could actually download the sample questions, but usually you can get access to some measure of the practice exams as well. The sample questions, you know, I only think there's like a few pages of them, like maybe it's like 10. That might be a great step. Otherwise, GP, it sounds like, especially if they're down, I don't know what's going on because there was an internal error on their side. I think for like $10 or something, you can get access to the practice exam questions. I might just wait, actually. Like, I might just review the student guide if you want to like review some material relevant for the exam. The student guide, as we pointed out before, is actually out on bookshelf.vitalsource.com. So you should have gotten access to this when you took the class. In here, you'll find, like, for example, your student guide, which will match whatever the version was that you took, which might have been 7.01, but it could have been 6.8.28 as well. I'd probably just review that material. I'm not sure why the sign-in's not working. Oh, you know what? That was the wrong login, but the previous one wasn't. Yeah, internal error. Look at that. That is cracking me up. Okay. Huh. All right. Well, regardless, I can't log in for whatever reason. So anyway, that's the final like set of strategies, is that, you know, run through the practice exam, make sure if you've got your voucher already, which all of you should have, you should just go ahead and sign up. The voucher is at the very last payment page, right? Remember, if you take it online, you're gonna have to make sure your desk is clear and you don't have a second monitor and everything's clear. It's everything that was covered in our first video. For those of you who are registered for this class, I think I'll get an email distribution list and I'll probably send you an email tomorrow. And that should like give you access to everything you need to know. Yeah, and so your main goal is just to take the practice exams, take one set of the review mode questions, just like we were doing today, until you can basically get 90% and then take another set. So we were working on set 3. If you want to grab any of the other sets, feel free to do so. And just keep working those sets until you get those questions. Be methodical. Understand why you got the answer right or why you got the answer wrong, and make sure you're clear about why the other answers are wrong. You should be able to look at them and kind of deconstruct them, right? And say, oh yeah, you know, EBS isn't used for that, or EFS isn't used for that. Okay. Questions of any type before we close down for the day?
So Michael, when I do the review mode, so once I complete all the questions, do I get like the percent, how much percent are
Mhm.
correct? Okay.
Oh yeah, they'll tell you. Yeah. They're like, hey, you got this many right, you got this many wrong. Here's your total passing percentage.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. It's 11:58. I'm going to hang out here for like 2 minutes more just in case any of you have any questions. Otherwise, that's the official close. Thank you for hanging out with me. Don't forget about amazon.quicklabs.com. Don't forget about the ramp up guides. Save all that for stuff for after you pass the exam. And do me a favor. If you have access to a Basecamp, because you've done classes with us before, post into that Basecamp, or just send me a quick email. It's michael.forrester@webhsolutions.com. If you run into any issues, please let me know. But you should get an email from me here shortly, no later than tomorrow, actually. That should include the video and anything else that we covered, okay?
Thanks a lot, Michael. This was super helpful. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime. Always fun to work out together.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very helpful.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye now.
Take care, Adam.
When will this be on Basecamp?